Coach, thank you so very much for joining us here on the Warm Down Pool. I'm excited to talk with you. I've known you. I met you 20 plus years ago. Kind of been in the same circle for a while. Now we'll both be serving on the CSCAA executive board starting this coming weekend at the convention. So I want to thank you so much for being on the show.
Hey, it's a great pleasure. I love doing this kind of thing. I think it's just fun to talk swimming, with any coaches, anybody that's involved in the sport, and we all can learn.
Absolutely.
Whenever I do something like this, I learn a little bit more, and I learn what other people are doing. And so it's fun to share. It really is.
I know just from being on the pool deck with the Illinois LSC early in my career in Decatur, you were at Northwestern at the time, all those coaches in the Chicago area, the whole LSC, half the time I felt bad for our athletes because they were swimming and we were sitting there talking about just different stuff about swimming. Yeah. And it really made me become more of a swim nerd. I've embraced that title over the years, and I still do it on a pool deck to this day at the NAIA National Championships. So I want to kick things off with you talking more about starting up everything at McKendree University. We'll get to your journey in swimming. That's usually my first question, but I really want to talk to you about starting the program at McKendree, because I remember when they announced they were going to hire for the program. We were in the NAIA, I was at Nationals, and then they announced the head coach was Jimmy Tierney, who I had known at Northwestern University. And what were some of the things starting from scratch? And I know there were a lot of hurdles because we kind of saw the evolution of it, but when you took that job, what was the biggest challenge that you faced on day one?
Well, I think it was just trying to figure out who had heard of McKendree, if the name meant anything. And for the most part, it didn't a whole lot. I even ran into some people in St. Louis when I'd start recruiting, and they weren't even 100% sure where McKendree was. And we were just, on the other side of the river a little bit from them. So that was probably the biggest thing is like, at least if you're starting a program at a state university where the name has some recognition and maybe their basketball team or football team or, somebody's had success, that's helpful. Now, we had success, but just at a different level that wasn't, in the limelight with the public and on ESPN in any way or anything like that. So I think that was the biggest thing, because there were, some really wonderful things here, and they were going to build a new facility, but I just had to get the word out. And again, that was probably just the biggest challenge early on.
When you started the recruiting process, and you guys, if I remember correctly, you had that year zero. So you had that year to recruit before you guys launched in the fall of 2016. What was your focus in terms of recruiting? What were the things that you were looking for in that initial class to kind of establish a brand new culture? Because it wasn't like you had upperclassmen that you could lean on to kind of set the tone. You were starting this from literal scratch. So what were things that you really emphasized in your recruiting process?
Well, that's a really good question, because I really had to think that through over and over and over. And obviously, we all want fast swimmers, right? Or swimmers that we think are going to be eventually very good, very talented, or, able to help your programs. But I thought, if this is going to be a sustainable thing, and if I'm going to enjoy this for a number of years to come, that I wanted the team to be of a certain sort of mindset and have certain values. When I recruited the very, very first class, I talked about that a lot, that I wanted a very supportive team, kind of a spirited group of people that really, really had each other's backs, were there for each other in the good times and the bad and that kind of thing. I also told them that they were going to help me create this, that I could not do this by myself. So I said, I need your help. Are you interested in joining me in creating and driving this thing forward? And majority of that first class was totally into it. And maybe that's why they came. Maybe that was their value set as well. Maybe that was just something that they felt like that they wanted to be a part of. And so that was the biggest thing. We talked about it a lot. We did different team activities, team building things, but it's really just the journey and the things that we experienced together. Because our pool wasn't open until January of that first season. So we're literally taking school buses, half hour to get to another pool, getting back at night, doing dry land outside and kind of some crazy conditions and all that kind of thing. So we sort of developed that toughness, and because there weren't any other swimmers on campus, like you mentioned, they had each other to lean on, and they really, really leaned on each other, and became very, very close very quickly.
I love that. I know I've talked to a bunch of coaches who've had that privilege of starting a brand new program, and they all said the same thing, and they really needed people that were going to come in and set the tone and lean on one another and build that culture. We talk about it here where I'm at the University of the Cumberlands of defining your legacy, and that those initial classes especially for you guys especially have started a legacy that needs to be followed. And I think that's fantastic. And I look at the results you guys had this year, and third at the GLVCs, great performances at NCAAs, third on the men's side, if I'm not mistaken. Correct, Coach? Perfect. I knew it was something along those lines. I do want to bring up something that's probably a sore subject, but I kind of need to address it. The 2020 NCAA Division II National Championships, the COVID year, unfortunately. I remember we were the week before for our nationals, and I talked with Mickey Wender at Colorado Mesa, and just the overwhelming feeling of the world shutting down, and you guys were in the middle of it. And having a great meet. Fortunately, I hate to say it that way, and I'm sure that's a sore spot, so I apologize. But tell me about how your team really bounced back from that, because you guys were having an amazing meet, especially on the men's side. The world is shutting down. You were all sent home. And then the next year you were in these lockdowns and all these different procedures. How did your team handle that disappointment and rally behind it? Because you guys have been phenomenal ever since then as well. So tell me about that adversity and how you guys overcame it.
Yeah, it's kind of a wild story, right? And, the first thing is the conference championship of 2020. So before that NCAAs, we had one of the best meets of any team I'd ever coached, maybe the best meet. I think we won 14 of the 19 swimming events, and we broke 9 conference records at that championships, and it was fantastic. It was so much fun. The team, energy was just through the roof, and I got back, and we were obviously very excited, very thrilled, but I really didn't know how we were going to carry that forward. 3.5 weeks later, I was almost expecting a little bit of a letdown, and talking with my assistant, we were trying to figure out, okay, what can we really do? Can we really do something big, like think about winning? And I was actually the one thinking, look, I don't know if that's realistic. Other teams had guys that, maybe hadn't shaved at their conference meet and all that kind of stuff. And then, sure enough, we go there, and day one, we win our first 2 events ever. And, I remember the 200 medley relay, because we'd broken the all-time conference record at the conference meet. And again, you're talking about a really, really fast conference.
Absolutely.
And then we go to nationals, and we go 1.2 seconds faster in a 200, which just kind of, again, shocked me a little bit. And then we won the 1,000 with our great distance swimmer, Fabio DeLu. It was like, okay, right. So we didn't take a step back, and we weren't, there wasn't any letdown and so forth. And, the next day after prelims, it looked like we were going to increase our lead, at least based on qualifying. And then the meet shut down. And the biggest thing I remember from that day was the emotion of the athletes was greater than, and not that I knew what to expect, but maybe it took me a little bit by surprise. I mean, they were crushed. I went back in because I was outside with a van, and they're in this sort of cafeteria eating area at the Spire, and it's just tears everywhere. And guys, girls, it didn't matter. So it was really, really emotional, very tough. We went back and had this, kind of emotional and type team meeting to kind of come to grips with it all. And even looking back from this day, it's certainly tough, because that was that first class, right, that I recruited, the ones that I said, let's do this together, right? And for 4 years we did it together, and for them to miss that opportunity to have, if we'd have won, that would have been our first trophy ever, would have been the national championship trophy, right? Wow. That's kind of crazy to think, but it would have been, and I mean, there's no guarantees. But I really feel like without a big DQ or something like that, I think we were on track to do that. But I guess on the positive side, it was like we've arrived, right? We are there. We are now among the powerhouse teams, Division II, and we're not going anywhere, right? We're here to stay. And succeeding years, yeah, everybody, COVID the next year was rough as well. And, we couldn't even get all of our athletes in, internationally. And so, and I'm sure we weren't the only team. So it was kind of like we weren't even the full team the next year. And we finished fourth, and then fourth again, and then third. And I think with the squad we had, I really feel like we're finishing about as well as we could team-wise. And our women actually are emerging as well. We were just 2 points out of top 10 this year, our highest finish ever. We expect to be in the top 10 next year and hopefully, again, there for good. So it's just been a little bit more of a gradual build than the men. But incredibly proud of how the team has dealt with all this, because it hasn't been easy. And, even this year, we won more events than any team in the men's competition, including 3 relays, which I love. I'm a huge relay guy. There's nothing like winning a relay at a championship meet. It's just such a fun thing. And there's so many people, celebrating. The entire team is celebrating everywhere. And so I'm really proud of that. So yeah, however, I tell you, I really think that first year or two building the team, culture, and the dynamic, I really feel like that helped take us where we are today. I don't think that we would have been swimming as high a level in 2020 had we not had such a unified, just strong, supportive group. So I really believe that, because on paper, where we were coming in, I don't think anybody could have projected us performing at that high a level.
That's great, Coach. I know, like I mentioned, we had wrapped up our national championships the week before, but we were hearing things were starting to shut down, or they're changing the Big Ten basketball tournament. And we just kind of looked at each other on the deck and we're like, well, we got through this. I'm sure everybody will get through this. And I remember sitting in my office and watching day one of the Division II national championships. I went to Ashland University, a D2 school. So D2 is near and dear to my heart as a former athlete there. And watching finals, seeing the great performances you guys had and just amazing racing. And then the world went away the next day. And I felt crushed for all those athletes. And our wrestling coach had wrestling, their championships the same time with us. His office was near mine. He came over to me and goes, "Are you hearing about this? Because is this happening with swimming?" And I said, "Yep." And because they were going into their finals, like they canceled the last matches. And so he just said, "What would we have done?" And I don't know. And I wanted to reach out, and I knew a couple of coaches who were at the meet, and I tried texting them like, "Look, I know you're going through a lot. Let's talk later," because that chaos. The one thing I've definitely seen from a lot of this is that 2020 year and 2021 as well, with the lockdowns, the restrictions, the testing, all this stuff, the resiliency of our athletes has been amazing who have come out of that. And that freshman class lost so much because they were sitting in lockdown. They couldn't hang out with people without getting in trouble, or fear of contact tracing and things along those lines. And I think it's made them a little more resilient. But one of the things that I wanted to bring up to you is, do you think from a social interaction standpoint that had a adverse effect, the lockdowns? Because I know with my athletes, I mean, they're all keyboard warriors, man. They're great on their phones, but I think the social dynamic with teams has taken a bit of a hit because of all the lockdowns. Give me your thoughts on that.
Well, I definitely think it took its toll. I think there was, damage because of it. I mean, a number of people lost athletes. I lost a couple athletes.
Same.
Which doesn't usually happen, but it was just because their experience wasn't a positive one overall. Wasn't what they expected, wasn't what they had planned on, so I think there was a toll taken among probably every program and every sport, and almost took a little bit of time to recover from that. I agree. I think the athletes that stuck with it came out the other side, in a lot of ways, are stronger and are going to be able to handle certain things down the line maybe better that then, had they not gone through that, they probably are a little tougher.
Yep.
And, I mean, I heard a couple of them talk about back then the other day, right? Just talking about some of the craziness and sitting around in their rooms and all of a sudden getting these messages, oh, you're in quarantine, you're in quarantine.
Oh.
And I'm sure we all had, a couple that were in and out like 3 times within a couple month period. And certainly the performances suffered somewhat. I don't think any of us know how much. In some ways, it maybe was impressive how well, some of them did perform. And, some of the stuff you see at a championship meets in some cases was maybe, more impressive than maybe we give it credit for with all that those athletes had endured. But yeah, I think it was certainly a difficult time. I think those programs that did have, a very connected team, a team that really cared for each other and could support and help each other out. But as we all know, the problem is the freshmen weren't able to, kind of acclimate and maybe build into that strong team dynamic because everybody was told to stay apart, right? And so had they been there a year, maybe a lot of those would have, stuck with it and survived. And because that support network would have been stronger. It's unfortunate, but I agree with you. I think we learned a lot, not just about coaching, but about life in general and how to deal with things like that. Obviously that we pray that there's never one like that again, but if there's even something similar or different type, that puts a little bit of a scare into the, our communities and, cuts back on some of the things that we're used to, experiencing in our everyday lives on a college campus, then hopefully a lot of us will be prepared for that and know how to manage it a little bit better.
I know I was talking with my junior class not too long ago because they were freshmen that very first year with the lockdown. And they talk about it like this thing was 50 years ago. Like, oh, back in the day when we had contact tracing, I'm like, guys, that was 2 years ago. Do you realize that? And just talking with them and asking them the question of how can we build our culture better? Because I think that's the one thing that, at least with my program, I've talked to a few other coaches, they've all said their culture took a hit and the coaches that were able to adapt to it way better than I did. And I'm still kind of putting my head around it. I think I've taken a lot for granted, and in communicating with my athletes, I haven't evolved enough with that. At the same time, these kids are all juniors and they had to go through their lockdowns. My oldest son was a freshman that year. He lost his high school graduation. He lost his senior prom. He was in lockdown, and he went to a school in Boston where there were heavier restrictions. So this was his first year essentially in college where things were open and he actually had freedom. So he goes, I'm a 3rd-year freshman, Dad. I said, that's okay. Your dad was a 4th-year sophomore. So it all worked out well for our family.
Yeah. I mean, it was amazing, right? And I remember vividly some of my internationals having to, get out fairly quickly. And so not only did they not get to finish their championship meet, they didn't get to finish their senior year on campus, didn't get to graduate on campus. And several of them haven't been back. They haven't been able to get back. And so to me, that was sad because they didn't have that closure of their college career and college life. Which is a shame. I
had to pack up probably about 6 or 7 lockers and ship them to their home countries because we went on spring break right after our nationals. So I had kids who were in Florida or they were in California and they're texting me going, Coach, I've got to jump a plane and head back to Sweden, or I've got to head back to Spain. What do I do with my stuff? And I said, don't worry about it. As long as you're not attached to that padlock, I'm cutting it and we'll be good to go. And I'll ship you everything. I've always taken pride being in a small college. We were talking about graduation at small colleges, being able to say goodbye to my seniors on that last day. And that's the forgotten class. And a lot of them have been able to come back into the country, especially my internationals. A lot of our kids were local and they've come back to say hi. But there's about 3 or 4 of them that I don't know that I'm ever going to see them again. I hope so. Just having it taken from them was so difficult. So the one thing I've wanted to talk to you about as well, obviously spent some time at Southern Illinois at Carbondale, moved on to Northwestern, had an amazing career as a women's coach at Northwestern University. I remember the days with Courtney Allen, and I'm going to butcher her name, so I'm going to apologize. Amy Balcerzak, is that correct?
Very good.
I remember those relays that you guys had. You talked about how much you loved relays, and just a great program up there at Northwestern before you moved on to McKendree. In your coaching time, how do you feel like you've evolved, not just from a training standpoint, but how have you evolved as a coach? Because I find myself now I've been coaching for essentially 30 years, if you count the age group and the summer league stuff. And I really want to go back and strangle 23-year-old me for thinking I knew everything. But how do you feel like you've evolved as a coach overall?
Well, as you said, certainly things changed, training wise from, some of the stuff that I did 20 to 30 years ago, which was a lot more aerobic, a lot more threshold training, things like that. Certainly not enough power, not enough sprinting kind of thing. We did it, but just not to the level that we do it now. And I think we were all doing dry land, weight training and all, but it's certainly moved to a different, level in my eyes in terms of how specific, our strength coaches can get. And, it's not the old fashioned weight room, right, that we all grew up in, and so it's definitely taken it to a different level, right? More just, we have better athletes and we're making them even better athletes in our sports. And I think just how you deal with them is different. I was very regimented as a coach. And if I had a 2-hour block, I used that 2 hours to 2 hours and 5 minutes or whatever, and try to squeeze everything in every day. In some ways that could be good, right? Because, even if I finish the swimming, maybe we do something else or work on starts or do this or that, but now I think, in some ways, maybe I'm certainly haven't gotten away from the hard training, but maybe a little more adaptable, a little more flexible about making adjustments, reading the athletes a little bit better if they're really tired or fatigued. I feel like it was almost always, with the exception of somebody being injured or something like that, but almost always sucking it up, dig in and finish things. And now, thinking, okay, maybe it's better if I get this person out, or maybe it's better if I tell this person not to come in tomorrow morning, because otherwise they might just be horrible for the next 2 or 3 days. And so,
Right.
Whether it's sort of recovery, how to recover, I think we've all gotten smarter, but I think it's just also the mental toll, and I think maybe at times at Northwestern, I should have tried to figure out not only the physical toll the athletes are taking, but the mental toll from their studies and their homework and all that. I feel like there are times that some athletes almost never recovered from that combination. Right. And still have athletes now that have very high academic standards and put a lot of pressure on themselves academically. So I think it's just kind of not being so concerned about fitting in everything and, more is better kind of thing, try to be as good as we could be each week and day to day and knowing how to make adjustments, along the way. So I still prepare my workouts ahead of time. I'm not the guy that's going to create it as it goes. That just doesn't, not how my mind works, but I certainly can adapt what I have, as we go into something and make adjustments, which I still do, fairly regularly. So, that's probably the biggest difference. And I think, we all learned various ways years ago, where you've got to, work on the mental health. And we probably got more information now, more things,
Absolutely,
out there to help us with that, but it still comes down to, helping the athletes manage their lives and creating opportunities and situations where they could be relaxed and they could have fun and they can laugh. And I think you could still do that around very challenging training. You just kind of got to know when to do it and, when those opportunities are best for that. It's somewhat of a different world where I don't know if it was stuff that we just didn't know back then and it wasn't labeled and all that kind of stuff. But, now it's very prevalent. It's very heightened in our world nowadays. And I think we just have to be more in tune to that and be prepared to make adjustments. You just can't treat athletes exactly the same as we did, a couple decades ago. It just doesn't work that well.
I know, talking with coaches in and out of swimming, and especially ones that have been involved for 10, 15, 20 years, I think you hit it right on the the nail on the head there. I don't think we knew really with the mental health. My former head coach at Ashland University, my first 2 years, Bill Dorincott, obviously now at Ohio State. Bill has gone on the record, and I have a video footage. It's great. I love it. That he said, I probably ruined more swimmers that first 2 years because I wasn't as aware of the individual needs. And he has a great quote. I'm going to say it till I'm blue in the face. When the only tool you have in your toolbox is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And I love that. And I think this generation of athletes, and I hear coaches all the time, oh, they're not tough enough. They're not as tough as they were back in the 90s or the 80s. No, they're curious. They're more in tune, I think, with their own mental health than we ever were. And I'm Generation X. I mean, we are the epitome of not being able to handle our mental health. But these kids, they ask questions, and it's not to question people. They're genuinely curious because they have the world at their fingertips. And I'm finding more of my athletes are getting involved in coaching, and they want to know, Coach, why are we doing X, Y, and Z? And maybe that doesn't always work for them. Like, I have kids, they want to be on power towers all the time. I got a 6-lane pool. I can't really do that as well as I'd like, but I want to remind them, like, these weren't options for a lot of programs, even back in the 90s when I swam. I was lucky. We had Total Performance Incorporated 30 minutes down the road, so we had power racks before anybody had power racks. They used to test them out at our pool. And whether it's drag socks, all the toys that are out there, man, I just want to play with them all. I'm a kid who loved Legos, so let's build. Let's try new things. And I think our athletes are more in tune to that, and they're more willing to try that more than distance swimmers. You have 10,000 a day, and most of it is like 8 1,000s and grind it out back when I swam. So I really think that mental health has been a critical one. The pandemic played a huge role in that, but also understanding and being able to relate to your athletes a lot better creates a better environment. And I'm struggling with that a little bit. I still have a little bit of a do as I say, I don't have to explain myself mentality, but I'm working on that. I'm trying to get better that way.
Yeah. You know, and I think some athletes are okay with that, right?
Yes.
Just not all of them. And, you know, I can still get to a national championship and have a seasoned athlete who's been very accomplished say, can you write a warm-up for me? You know? Mm-hmm. So sometimes they do believe in you and trust in you all the way, and they're willing to take whatever you could give. But yeah, you just kind of got to know which people that applies to and who it doesn't. And other people, maybe you sort of suggest it, right? And see if they grab it. And then they view it more as a shared thing, right? We're doing this together. So it's difficult if you're dealing with a big team as a whole, because you can't vary everything, but you certainly have to at times when the case arises.
I had an athlete here at Cumberland's who's graduating from medical school this weekend. She told me, I think it was her junior year, she said, you know, Coach, you have some athletes here that you need to pat them on the back, and you got some you need to put your foot on their butt. And I said, well, which one are you? And she goes, I'll let you know. So that was one of those where it's like, I know who you are. I know how you are. And I'm going to be putting my foot on your butt from time to time, because I know that's what you need for sure. You've obviously been involved with the sport on the international level for many years, as well as the collegiate level. Seeing this sport evolve so much, and I remember 2008, 2009, the years of the super suit, and we'll never break any of these records. They'll stand for decades, and we are blowing them out of the water. What has surprised you the most about how fast this sport has gotten, especially, I would say, in the last 10 to 15 years?
Yeah, gosh, that's a great question. There are a number of things. And, you know, seeing how fast some of the females are swimming today, just astounding, right? And whether it be a Kate Douglas or, you know, some of the Sandpiper girls. And, you know, you just look at some of those times and you're thinking, you know, wasn't too far back when I'd recruit a male at that level and think, okay, I got a good guy, right? But it's amazing. And I think, you know, well, on both sides, of course, but I think the females are just stronger and you know, just better athletes. And gosh, you see, and obviously there are great ones in all sizes and so forth, but you know, still you'd see some of these 6'2", 6'3", you know, girls that, you know, you would think could be a volleyball player or a basketball player or whatever, you know, and maybe at times we were losing those athletes to other sports. And maybe we're, getting them more now for whatever reason. But, I think seeing just some of the explosiveness, obviously the underwater stuff is just taken off, right? And I think we're just learning still more and more about what works, right? And little technical things that help athletes get faster. And, we all have our certain, types of training that we like to do, but it's cool to see all these other possibilities where athletes go really fast, right? And, as coaches, we know that we borrow from this and borrow from that. And, but if somebody's doing it with just short speed work, type thing, good for them, right? And if somebody's still doing it with more aerobic volume and more threshold type work, good for them, right? I think to me as a coach, I feel like the more possibilities out there, the better for all of us, right? And we could try to find what fits our style and our personality. And but I feel like years ago it seemed like most fast swimming was coming from pretty much the same type of training for a long time, and now it's just all over the place. And I think we're stretching the bounds even of how much fast stuff an athlete can handle in training, and if you go back in the day with some of the sports science and look at the percentages of speed work and lactate and all that, and it seems like some programs are blowing that away in terms of the percentages and the amount of volume in a week. Now, certainly there is a tipping point, right? I mean, an athlete's going to break down at some point if you're swimming too much high intensity stuff. But yeah, how do you balance that out and mix it in with power stuff, right? Just doing different things. Like I'll sometimes do power resistance type stuff and then do something really fast off the block. And then I'll go back, right? Strap on the chute or the drag socks and let's do some more technique, power work, blah, 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 get up, go fast, and so I think we're just creating all sorts of different ways to try to see if we can take our athletes to another level. But yeah, it's crazy. And I think those of us been around for a while. I still feel like, I hope that we can kind of get a rebirth in our distance, swimming. Obviously, Katie Ledecky's amazing, and we've got some other girls. And so right now, at least it's more on the guys' side that hasn't been as great. But again, we got Bobby Fink, we've got, had a bunch of, but maybe just as a whole, right? There's not a bunch of them up there, pushing that kind of world level toward the top. And so hopefully, right, that kind of gets back. But it's amazing, right? I mean, you can look at some of the Australian women and like,
oh yeah,
just the stuff that they're doing now is just awesome. I mean, it opens up the realm of possibilities about how fast we can go, right? And so I think with any of our athletes that have in their own mind limits, I think one of the greatest things that we could do as coaches is try to open up their minds to the possibilities, and who knows how fast we could go, right? We've all had athletes, I know I've had, where I didn't think athletes could go as fast as they did. They don't train great. They don't do this, don't do that. And then all of a sudden, bam, right? The lights go on, you put them up on the blocks and they just light it up. It's like, okay, all right, well, they're a racer, right? They're a thoroughbred. So how do we prepare the thoroughbred? Maybe they're different from the person that could just grind it out every day. And I think we got to figure out how to take care of those athletes. Gary Hall Jr., historically, right? And I've talked to some of his coaches way back in the day, right? He wasn't a great trainer. He wasn't great this, but you had to figure out how to get him better and develop him in maybe a different way than, your traditional, swimmers. So yeah. So kudos to some of these coaches that are stretching our minds, my mind, and trying different things and figuring out different ways that athletes could go fast. And I think there's still more changes coming, especially with stuff that you might be able to do on dry land and even athletes that have tried to do the dry meet warm up, and you do that 3/4 of it, and then a little bit of water stuff, and then you're ready to go. Maybe in certain events, I think it'd be fun to try sometime and experiment with it. So, but I think there are a lot of things still coming down the road here in the coming years that are gonna still surprise us and blow us away with some of the results that we're going to see.
I just remember, again, I'm drawing on my own history as an athlete. One of the things that I've seen that has dramatically changed, and I think it has a huge impacts on our sport, just how we stretch. The days of static stretching, the arm across the chest, the one over the shoulder, and the research and the sports science that has come out against that, the more dynamic movements, utilizations of TheraBands, different types of exercises that are out there just to kind of warm up your body. We started doing it with all our dry land. We warm up with 5 minutes of jump rope, which for swimmers is hilarious because we truly do not, we're in the water for a reason. The swimmers are happy I'm not making them run, but at the same time, we'll use jump rope as a full body warm up. And just looking at how strength training has improved dramatically from the days of just trying to put on masks, even with your distance swimmers. I think that's playing a huge role in the evolution of our athletes right now. And I think that's the critical one. We're seeing more athletes in our sport. Like growing up, I knew like 2 kids who could do sports other than swimming. Like they were inept in anything else, and especially a ball sport. I knew a girl who was a phenomenal softball player and an amazing swimmer. So she had hand-eye coordination and she had cardio. Never seen that since. But I think with our athletes now that we're seeing more athletes, kids who have done a lot more sports and been successful in those. And we've just been very fortunate they've chosen swimming as their path, especially college and beyond. I think you're right. I think our men's distance swimming, Bobby Fink is obviously the exception to the rule, Kieran Smith as well. I think that's something we need to kind of elevate a little bit more. But I see programs like Sandpipers and what they're doing with their program. And I think that's going to help translate down the line for our distance swimmers here in the United States. It's just been amazing to watch. I remember when Freddie Bousquet broke 19 in the 50 freestyle for the first time, and now 18s are passe. I think this year, if you didn't go 18.6 or something crazy like that, 18.3, you weren't making top 16, let alone top 8. And it was a national champion. And now we have 2 men under 18 in the 50 free with Caleb Dressel and Jordan Crooks. I'm waiting till 40 point is the new standard to make top 6. That day will come.
It will.
And it's going to be awesome to see. Last thing that I have for you before we hit our big segment, because I know you got to get going for practice here in a little bit. If you could, and obviously you have assistant coaches, there's a lot of young coaches in our sport right now. What is the biggest piece of advice you can give to a young coach, somebody who's either a GA or a first-time assistant coach? They're coming into the sport. What's the biggest piece of advice you can give them right now?
I think one thing would be always be a student of the sport and always be learning and whether it be reading or, online stuff or going to conferences and clinics, but just have your mind open to the possibilities of different things. As soon as you've got it figured out, you'll realize you don't have it figured out, right? And, and I think our community of coaches are fantastic in terms of the willingness to share. I've always admired that in our swimming coach community. People are willing to, just throw their stuff out there and say, this is what I've done to be successful. And most coaches are open to chatting about it. At least that's my experience. So I learned from some tremendous coaches and never did I feel like somebody wasn't, willing to share. And, even if a certain time I approached them was busy, it would be another time that I could get back to them and pick their brain and try to figure out what they're doing. So, I think that's the biggest thing. And it's great to be confident what you're doing and feel like you've got something going. I think that's maybe the biggest thing, but don't ever feel like that's it. Right. And there's not more out there or adjustments that you can make along the way because things are still going to change. Right. And new challenges for athletes are going to come out, whether it's physical, mental, emotional. So I think you just have to be prepared to just, absorb and not just information, but experiences and evaluate them and try to figure out, always there's something a little bit better. Some of the greatest coaches that I've been around and talked to have always looked to, even after a successful year, what can we do next it's going to make it even better? What can we do next? And I think that's the approach that any coach should take.
Absolutely. I know we're both going to be at the CSEA convention. Cheap plug for that right now, college coaches. Get to that, because I'll tell you what, we've had some great speakers the past couple of years. Especially, I loved Nick Askew last year from Howard University, hearing how he built that. I'm hoping to get him on the show down the line. But the networking, and again, you talk about it. We talk about swimming all the time. This is our sport. This podcast would not exist had it not been for my 18-year-old son who has a media background saying, "Dad, you do this for fun. Talk to more people." And I'm like, your mother's going to love that, by the way. So this is how it all came to be. And I think that just continuing to hear people and get new ideas. Mike Llewellyn was with KC Blazers for a long time. Mike told me you could hear 100 things from a coach and 99 of them aren't going to work, but there may be that one piece that you can include into your repertoire. And that is the important thing. So now, Coach, our last section, we call it 650s on the top. This is a this or that situation. Originally, I knew you were born and raised in Kentucky. I was going to throw one, whether you were a UK or Louisville fan, and then I found out you were a Louisville grad. So that would be kind of, I got to throw that one out immediately. 6 questions right off the bat. Dine in or take out?
Dine in.
Pancakes or waffles?
Waffles.
Better vacation, the English countryside or the Swiss Alps?
Swiss Alps.
This one's critical, Coach. This could determine our friendship. Christmas or Halloween?
Christmas.
And we can't be friends. All right. Darn it. Crossword puzzles or Sudoku?
Crossword puzzles.
And number 6, and this one's important. You spent 21 years in the Chicago area, specifically in Evanston, and I know exactly where they all are. Lou Malnati's or Gino's East?
That's a tough one. That's a tough one. I'll go with Lou's just because it was the local spot, but I love Gino's East down in the city. They're both great pizzas. So
anytime we had senior state or senior championships at Northwestern, the 2 places I always made sure I went was the Lou Malnati's there in Evanston and the Flat Top Grill. And when we had convention there a couple of years ago, I took all my friends like, we're going to Flat Top, because that's where all the Illinois coaches ended up. Well, Coach, thank you. Amazing. Thank you so very much for being on the show. We'll see each other in a couple days. Sure, the meeting is going to be awesome with the D1 transformation stuff coming down the pipe. I'm hoping to have Sam on the show afterwards at some point to kind of talk through that. But again, thank you for taking the time to talk with me. I really appreciate it.
Hey, it's my pleasure. This has been a fun time for me. And I'm looking forward to the convention in a big way. And I think it's going to be exciting, and I think we're just going to learn a lot down there. So can't wait.
Thank you, Coach.
All the best.